What is the stupidest thing a teacher has tried to tell your child? One of my kids was reading Grapes of Wrath for a high school English class. For those unfamiliar with the book, it's about a poor American family that moves out west looking for a better life. There's also a little side story about a turtle having trouble crossing the road. The teacher was explaining how the turtle symbolizes the family, and that they had to shed their old life much like a turtle sheds its shell. When informed that turtles don't do that, she was confused because the turtles in Mario come out of their shells. Me. How do you spell barely? Teach. That's not a real word. You can't use it. Me. Yes it is. Teach. No it isn't. The other students seemed just as confused as me. That my daughter was pronouncing her last name wrong. Her own name, not the teacher's name. Learning about food webs and nutrients in 9th grade biology class. I ask the teacher a question. Me. Where do mushrooms and other fungi fit in all this? What kind of vitamins or other things would I get from eating them? Teacher. Because mushrooms aren't part of the food chain and feed only off dead things. They wouldn't have any nutritional value. 4th grade gym health teacher told us that sleeping on your stomach causes stomach cancer. That he's not allowed to read the Guinness Book of World Records. They literally have the entire collection of these books at the school library, but refuse to let any of the kids read them, and if they do they punish them for it. They also won't remove the books from the library. It's ducking bizarre. My 7th grade science teacher condescendingly told me there was no such thing as dry ice. While reading Winnie the Pooh, our teacher said the word honeycomb wasn't a real word, just something Pooh made up. The same teacher used a flash on her camera while taking pictures of the stars in the night sky. A couple of years ago my daughter went to 3's preschool and the teachers were fully aware that she's in speech therapy and wasn't verbal yet. On the first day of school she got a bad mark because she wouldn't verbally tell the class what she did over the summer. WTF. That was the first in a long string of issues with her teachers that lead us to pull her out of that school before Halloween of that year. When he was 11 my son's teacher told him he was lying about being colorblind and sent him to detention as there was no such thing as colorblindness. Had a teacher try to convince me that Lenin and Stalin was the same man, and that his name was in fact Lenin Stalin. I'm not even from Russia. This convo somehow popped up in economics class. Son's 3rd grade assignment, draw your dream house. He got an F because his dream house was unrealistic. He failed another student choice of topic assignment he did on dinosaurs. Because dinosaurs weren't real as they weren't in the Bible. He got detention when he told her neither were air conditioners. Public school early 90s in rural Texas. I can tell you the stupidest thing a teacher has told me. The dad. We were getting a tour of the school's community garden. The teacher is rambling on about the different veggies and stuff they grow. We are walking by these giant sunflowers. Teacher. Oh, these are sunflowers. For making popcorn. Me. You mean you add them to popcorn? Teacher. No. Sunflower seeds make popcorn. Me. I'm 100% sure corn kernels are used for making popcorn. Hence the name popcorn. She sighed and moved on, continuing to think I'm a hulking 6 feet 5 inches Neanderthal. Now we're at the herb section and she points at the thyme and rosemary. Teacher. This is thyme and rosemary. We use these to make chocolate. Me. What? You add those to chocolate? That has to give it a funky taste. I'm surprised the kids like it. Teacher. No. We don't add it to chocolate. Chocolate is made from them. I gave up questioning her at this point and finished the tour silently contemplating how this woman can zip up her pants in the morning, let alone get a degree and teaching certificate. When we took a standardized test at the beginning of the school year, I scored a perfect score. At the end of the year we took the same test and I scored a perfect score once again. But I wasn't allowed to go to the ice cream party because my score didn't improve from the first time to second. When I was in 4th-5th grade I had a huge Tom Clancy binge going on and I loved reading the short novels, the ones with his name on them but written by someone else, and in 5th grade I decided to read my first actual book of his, which was approximately 500-600 pages. My teacher chewed me out in the middle of class for pretending to read to impress the class and said that there was no way I could comprehend such a large book. My parents always make this joke about me, that my first grade teacher told them that I would have problems learning how to read, because I couldn't skip. Literally, I could already read, and was reading books on a daily basis after school just fine. Not my kid but my niece. She was being bullied and her teacher told her to let it go and think about how the bully feels and that it's his way of showing her he likes her. Or my favorite line, "You guys are all young and kids will be kids, just deal with it." To my brother's friend, "Your mom has a tumor? Oh honey, that's cancer. She will die for sure." He was 9 at the time. His mom is doing great BTW. Video games aren't going to become a thing. My brother's kindergarten teacher tried to convince him that his name was Alexander when it is actually just Alex. There was another student in his class named Alexander who preferred to be called Alex. The teacher actually drove my brother to tears when he tried to explain what his real name was. Our parents had to get involved and get the teacher to back off. Who argues with a child about what their real name is? My kindergarten teacher told my mother that I was retarded and would never learn to read. I never went back to that school. I am American, but I spent 5th and 6th grade in the Netherlands, where kids start English lessons in 5th grade. In 5th grade my teacher insisted to me that the word tortoise was pronounced tortoise. No amount of insisting on my part could get through to him. He just kept telling me that maybe that's how you say it in America, but this is how it's really pronounced. In 5th grade my science teacher tried to tell me that heavier objects fall faster, then proceeded to drop a paper and a pencil to prove it. I told him that air resistance was the reason the paper fell slower. Then I dropped a pencil and a paper clip. He watched them hit the ground at the same time. Told me I threw the paper clip down and just dropped the pencil, and told me to sit down. He is still teaching. Teacher once argued with me about how to pronounce my own damn name. When I was in kindergarten my mom was called in because there was something wrong with me. Turns out that the problem was that when I was asked to draw my family I drew everybody as ducks. They were all there. Mom, dad, siblings. But they were ducks. The teacher insisted this was very serious and my mother asked why. They said they didn't know. But it wasn't normal. My mom was very pissed off. I was the child. My 6th grade teacher had us research and compile 10 poems with a running theme. I chose animals. One of my poems had to do with ants, while one was about dogs, another about lions, etc. When the project was returned, I noticed that I lost 5 points for some reason. When I asked why, my teacher said, "Your theme was animals. Since ants are not animals, I took off those points." My little 11-year-old brain imploded. I had to bring in a signed note from the biology teacher stating that ants were indeed animals to get those points back. Our son came home confused because he was told he spelled his name wrong. My wife hustled down to the school to carefully explain to the older teacher, "No, we use the German spelling of his name, not the Ohio spelling." My wife then repeated that in her fluent German with some added NSFW words. I will never forget an incident that happened to me in preschool. It's probably one of my earliest memories. We were sitting on the carpet in front of the teacher. She had just finished talking to us about squirrels. She asked us to name some places we would see a squirrel. I raised my hand at once. The other kids named trees, bushes, grass, and when she called on me, I said on the wires. Because every day, the squirrels would use the telephone wires to walk on. She told me I was wrong. Dummage. I had an early lesson teaching me that teachers aren't always right. P.S. This was in 1985 and I should be over it by now. My mom was once told that I was disrespectful because I corrected the math teacher in a 2nd grade multiple times. My mom's only response was, "Well, is he right? Because I'm not punishing him for being right." And that's how my pedantry has survived into adulthood. My son's 3rd grade teacher told the class that birds do not eat other birds after watching the Thanksgiving Charlie Brown special where Woodstock sits down to eat turkey. I had a geography teacher advise the entire class to go to Walmart and buy a compass so that if they were driving their car and a heavy rain or snow came that prevented them from seeing down the road, they could still navigate via compass. Not exactly the question, But in kindergarten there was some concern because on some test, with pictures, I didn't know what a wheelbarrow was. My parents pointed out that I had never seen a wheelbarrow. When he was about 5, my son's teacher decided she'd try to cure everyone in the class of their worst fears. At the time he was afraid of the dark. So said teacher sat him in the middle of the classroom with a blanket over his head to convince him there was nothing to be scared about. She wasn't at the school the next year. And very long ago in my own childhood, our head teacher explained to the class how heavier things fall faster. One little 10-year-old brainiac went home and told his parents this howler. And the head teacher was removed before my final year in primary school, having been in her class for 2 years. Suspect that was only actually part of the reason. Edit thanks to those below explaining about gravity etc. When I woke up this morning and saw all the questions asking why that was wrong, I had one of those everything you know is wrong type moments. My daughter was in a field trip and I chaperoned. The lady was talking about Indians, Native Americans, and I was about ready to pull my hair out listening to her. During the Ice Age, like the movie, all the oceans froze. The Indians walked across the frozen ocean from Europe and migrated west. Indians used teepees in hot weather and wigwams in cold weather. Indians didn't know how to plant crops and only knew how to hunt animals and gather plants to eat. Indians hunted elephants in Florida. Indians made arrow tips from limestone because it's so strong. I know I'm missing quite a few. It was like nearly everything she said was false. Looking back I really wish I had stood up and said something. But anxiety and all. The craziest part is all the other parents and teachers kind of nodded along while I'm looking around at everyone wondering if anyone else actually was listening to the crap the lady was spewing. Stupidest thing a teacher told me. I had a teacher in high school that said that if you shine a light on the back of someone's knee they don't feel nauseous on an airplane, thus disproving evolution. Utah. I can't think of 2 things that were told to me by a teacher. Honestly don't know which one is worse. 1. In 3rd grade we were talking about units of measurement and someone asked if a meter was longer than a yard. The teacher proceeded to pull out 2 yardsticks and said one was a beater stick, lined them up and informed the class that a beater and a yard were the same length. 2. Middle school teacher was telling the class how lack of exposure to germs in developed countries has weakened our immune systems and led to various autoimmune disease issues like AIDS. Then she said that in 3rd world countries in Africa they had stronger immune systems and that they didn't have diseases like AIDS. Not really answering the question correctly, but when I was in kindergarten my teacher called my parents to come to the school to break the news that your son will never be an artist. My parents were confused as to why they needed to be there to hear that since it wasn't important. I never even liked art. I just enjoyed doodling all the time in class since I was bored. My sister had a teacher who marked her incorrect for spelling the word okay, saying that the correct spelling was okay. Not my kid, but my teacher told me nostalgic wasn't a word. She taught English and I was a junior in high school. You naturally may think, oh I bet you spelled or said it wrong. Nope, I used it. She asked what I was trying to say and I explained. Yeah no, like when you are remembering something nice from your past. No kids, but a teacher once told me that if I didn't cut my long bangs, boys wouldn't find me attractive and I'd end up alone. I was 12. Just yesterday my daughter's teacher told her, and the whole class, they would get in trouble if she didn't bring 2 cans of food for the food drive and that your parents have $1 for 2 cans of food. I of course gave her the 2 cans, but she decided not to turn them in after the talk we had with her about how giving food is a good thing but being forced to and bullied into it is not okay. She said I will see what trouble I get into. She did not get in trouble. She is 9 years old and in the 4th grade. Added her age. My little sister's math teacher recently docked her a point because she wrote something like their data suggests and the teacher wanted it to say his or her instead of their. In the teacher's defense, she was foreign and not entirely fluent in English and genuinely wasn't aware that using they to refer to an individual whose gender isn't specified is pretty well accepted in English. But still, why dock points for grammar in math homework? Eater. Those of you who support me on the use of singular they but insist that data be treated as a plural. You are my favorite kind of person. Less than 3. yelled at me when I told her that Eiffel Tower is in Paris, not Rome. I was in Paris year before. I even told her I saw a triumphal arch from the top of the tower. She told me to shut up. My GCSE maths teacher didn't know what a hypotenuse was. Not something told to my child, but something told to me. More than if every American paid just $5 more on their taxes, the national debt would be paid off immediately. He then went on a rant about how politicians don't do it because they prefer to complain about the debt and never do anything. He then said if we all added $5 to our taxes, they would need to create another government agency to deal with all the money and it would end up costing more. Not only did this guy suck at math, but honestly has no idea how taxes or government work. It probably isn't a shock to learn he was a coach first and a teacher second. Years later, that same teacher was fired for touching a female student inappropriately and making sexual comments to her. Real stand-up guy. My 9th grade chemistry teacher tried telling me that cations and anions were pronounced cashins and enions. I got points on a paper taken off for using a few semicolons. My teacher explained that I shouldn't use semicolons because nobody knows how to use them. I use them regularly when I'm compiling documents for my job, and get a small sense of joy every time I see them in the final version. Was the child. I was in an ESL class back in 1st grade, and we played a game where you're given a letter and find an English word that starts with it. A apple, B book. I got the letter I, and no one believed me when I said igloo. The teacher was adamant that I use something like ice cream. Apparently I wasn't allowed to use a big word that I learned from reading books. Same thing happened a year later in a different class. I had D, so I went with Doom, because I watched Phineas and Ferb a lot, and that's a baddest word for 7-year-old me. Everyone in class forced me to use door because that's not a real word. Not quite what OP is asking, but my 5th grade teacher told me that dinosaur bones were put in the ground by the devil in order to confuse us so that we would cast our eyes away from God. Happened to me as a kindergartner. Right is right and left is wrong about which hand to write and draw with. 1st grade teacher thought I was diabetic because I kept wanting to drink from the water fountain. I was the child in the deep south where things are still a little medieval at times. I was 15 and had suddenly been hit with the puberty bazooka, went from flat chested to well over a D cup in the span of summer break and was still growing. My grandmother was the one at the parent-teacher conference and I think maybe the teacher thought since they were similar in age they'd share the same sentiments. The woman, a mean geography teacher that should have retired in the 80s, suggested that my grandmother should bind my breasts to keep them from growing into a larger distraction for other students. My grandmother gave that woman the coldest up and down glare and simply said, as nerdism girl displays adequate knowledge of geography and you've mentioned no concerns for her performance, I'll assume we're done here. However, a bit of personal advice, honey, stick to geography. Anatomy just isn't in your wheelhouse. I found out later that the exact same thing had been suggested when she was in school in the 50s and that binding breasts that are still growing is apparently an extremely painful process that can lead to damage and deformation of tissues that cause all sorts of back, neck, shoulder issues as well as possibly increasing risk of breast cancer and mastitis. She was shocked and disgusted to hear the practice mentioned almost 5 decades later. In 2nd grade, the teacher pulled us out of class one at a time for a timed silent reading test. When it was my turn, I quickly read the paragraph and signaled I was finished. My teacher outright called me a liar. She said there was no way I could have read that fast. She couldn't even read that fast and made me do it again. I read the passage again and gave the signal. She was furious, demanded that I was cheating and insisted that I recount the story to prove there was no way I was actually reading it. I told her every fact about polar bears that I had read twice now and waited for her response. She literally said nothing and sent me back to my seat. I've thought about this event at least a few times a week for my entire life. The message from a trusted adult, if you're smart, you must be lying, could have been really damaging to a developing mind. Told my daughter she was just stupid and maybe she should transfer to a different school. She has dyslexia. When I was in primary school, my teacher said that homosexuality was a disease. My family was dealing with my brother's coming out at the time, and I was really worried when my teacher said that. I didn't say anything at the time, but when I got home I googled it. Turns out in Canada homosexuality was removed from the mental diseases list in the 70s. I was relieved because I thought this meant my brother was going to be okay. The next day I told this to my teacher. She was really apologetic about it and she said in front of the whole class that what she said about homosexuality was incorrect. Even though she did say something stupid, she was mature enough to not get angry when a young boy put her in her place. I never told my parents or my brother about this. Maybe I should. My 2nd grade teacher told me you couldn't see the sun and the moon at the same time. She then mocked me in front of the class. A viciously stupid woman. 1st grade teacher tried to tell my child there was no August 31st and that her birthday must be on the 30th. That my son couldn't have long hair because it was too distracting, and after the doctor advised us to get him shoes that were a size bigger because of severe foot pain, not due to having too small of shoes. We never found out what causes it. She informed us that he had to get new shoes or would not be allowed on the playground. Through gritted teeth I explained that his pediatrician says he needs to wear bigger shoes, and filed a complaint. He was only 4/5 and in TK at the time, but she was so hard on him that she didn't deserve the Italian Achievement Award because she didn't put in enough effort. Kid had a 97% average in class. Next highest student had 85%. Kid spent 5 months as an exchange student in Italy, worked after school in an adult Italian language center, was a barista at an Italian coffee shop, was planning to study international relations at uni. The number 2 kid got the Italian Achievement Award because they put in more effort. In elementary school my teacher asked what was 1/3's decimal value. I said approximately 0.333 and she insisted that wasn't approximate. I had a teacher in high school get into an argument with the class because a student said something about the sun rising in the east. The teacher was adamant that the sun rose in the west. The fact that the whole class disagreed did not deter her. This was before the internet. I was pretty advanced in elementary middle school and would finish most of my work way ahead of schedule. I wasn't disruptive at all. I'd just sit at my desk and read a library book. 80% of my teachers thought this was absolutely unacceptable. They'd tell me to double check my work, and if I had, they'd tell me to check it again. I got in so much trouble because I pulled out a book when I ran out of work. What the duck else was I gonna do? My teacher was angry that I used my allowed 3 bathroom passes for the entire year in a semester. So she told me I was no longer able to use the restroom during her class for the entire year. This was in high school. I told my father about this and he called her and then the principal, and I guess she was chewed out. After that, the teacher told me never to speak to my father about her or her class again. Naturally, I did. Not my child but me myself. My grade 4 teacher believed that every word should have an opposite word. She used to say that a tank top are the opposite of a jacket or that a grocery store is the opposite of a hair salon. Changed my school the next year. My kindergarten teacher told me that roads couldn't be red when I was coloring. When I was 25, I went all the way north in Michigan, the tip of the peninsula off the Upper Peninsula, to a city called Copper Harbor. Guess what? There's a lot of iron in the aggregate that they use in road construction and the roads turn red because of it. It's not bright red, but it's clearly red, and the transition from the light grey that you're used to is quite jarring. I wanted to become a doctor. Teacher told me black people can't be doctors because who is gonna clean the hospitals? My mother had a field day with that itch. I never became a DR, but not because of this teacher. I realized I don't do well with blood and stuff. Oh duck UMRS. Ruth, with your racist self. My ma works in women's healthcare, and one of my preschool teachers told her that I needed to stop correcting other kids about babies coming from the uterus, not the stomach. My ma was like, well, she's right. So no, I'm not gonna do that, and neither should you. She loves to tell that story still.